Welcome back to the Bitcoin School podcast, where we are shining a light on the personal stories of Bitcoin educators around the world. Today, I am with my colleague Huxl3y, coming to you live from England. And we're hoping to shine a light on what's going on in England, what some of the hurdles are for mainstream adoption, and the efforts that Huxley is putting in with his students right there in the southern part of London. So thanks for being here, Huxley. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to speak to you and share a little bit about what's going on over here.
Awesome. So we'll start off with the low-hanging fruit here. How did you get into Bitcoin? How long have you been down the rabbit hole? And at what point, did the focus turn from, learning about the protocol and deciding that this is something that others need to know about and you're the man for the job,
So I started learning about Bitcoin in 2012, and I was mainly through Reddit. I was in my early 20s and I was a university student. I was spending a lot of time on Reddit and I came across Bitcoin. I was already familiar with some of the problems with the fiat system because I was 18 when the financial crisis happened, and I've been surrounded by really deep in the fiat world, I suppose, and I've always felt a real sense of unease about the way that the world is going, and I've always kind of thought that everything's a bit kind of corrupted and wrong. And so found out about Bitcoin in 2012. But when I spoke to people in my family and people around me about it, they dismissed it out of hand. And my nature is to be I'm quite an agreeable person in my nature. And so I think that, I kind of listened to those people. I was still very young. And so didn't really have the conviction to pursue it as much as I wish now that I had done. And I really did recognize the problems with the system as it stood. So I had studied geography as my degree at university, and especially understanding the problems of fiat money, I was absolutely convinced, and to some degree I still am convinced, that we go through a Parker Lewis suddenly type event where there's a shift in the system and the dominoes fall very quickly and very fast and it becomes very chaotic. And because of that, I wanted to be prepared for that scenario. So I went to one thing that I remember that really stuck with me is I was watching a documentary about, and I was really learning about and trying to learn about sustainable buildings and houses that could support you where you wouldn't need to be connected to the grid. And one that I was really impressed by its simplicity was the Earthship, which was a design by an architect called Michael Reynolds. And this documentary called The Garbage Warrior. And that really captivated me. And the design of an Earthship is really interesting because it uses the energy from it's a very passive building, so it uses energy from the sun, and it's built with materials which are local to the site. So it's a rammed earth building, which means that earth is rammed into tires, and then tires are stacked in a U shape, where the front of the U faces the sun. So in the northern hemisphere it would face south, and it captures the energy of the sun as it passes over, and then it's insulated so it retains the heat of the sun. And so I went to New Zealand, to the South Island of New Zealand, to meet Michael Reynolds, who was doing a course on how to build these, and learn how to build one of these Earthships. And they collect all of their own rainwater. The rainwater once you've used it for washing your hands or flushing the toilet, it goes through cells to feed the plants, and then goes out into your fruit trees, and all of the waste from the building is essentially reused. So the idea was to learn about this so that I could build one of these for myself, and then kind of remove myself from the chaos which I felt as though would be coming as a consequence the like corruption within the financial system. And I think the thing I realized going to New Zealand and working on this project, because I then stayed and worked on small farms. So I was in around Christchurch in the South Island, and going around working on like biodynamic farms and permaculture farms, and really kind of getting into that. And I think the thing I realized is you need to have sovereignty, you need to have money. You need to be able to provide for yourself. And it's all very well understanding how to build an earthship that can generate all of its own energy and all of its own food. And you might be able to, know how to grow your own food, but you still need to have a piece of land. Mm-hmm. You still need to the ability to build the thing in the first place. And I think it just really struck me that there's no escaping that. You need to be able to have money. And at the time I was, broke, really. I was traveling and working in New Zealand, but didn't have enough money to buy land or to pay to build a house or anything like that. And so my idealism hit reality in many respects. Having said that, I think that coming back to London, I was just afraid of coming back and then having to work in the city, going up on the train every day, working in insurance or recruitment, or working in the financial services system, which I instinctively knew was broken and corrupted. And not only did I know it was broken and corrupted, but I knew that if I worked in that and was surrounded by that, then it would in many ways corrupt me, and that I would become what I didn't want to be. So I stayed in New Zealand, and New Zealand's a great spot. It's a great plan B hideout spot, especially the South Island. Loads of very wealthy American billionaires fly into the South Island, and they buy up tracts of land and they build their bunkers.
No way.
Yeah, it's really popular, especially right in the South Island. There's an area which is called Paradise, and it's just spectacular mountains. It's really sparsely populated. There's huge amounts of energy because it's all generated from hydroelectric power, and loads of food because it's all sheep farming. So there's lots of sheep and cattle. So there's more sheep in New Zealand than there are people. So it's a great.
They actually have soil down there.
Yeah, they do. They have topsoil. And there's a lot of people who are interested in things like biodynamics. Biodynamics is very popular. It's not seen as woo-woo or like frowned upon. People are, very in touch with the earth. The Māori culture, the indigenous culture, is a warrior culture. And so it's one of the few indigenous cultures that, because they're such warriors, it survived colonialism. The names of the places and the culture itself is still really strong. And that really resonated with me, like being in a place where that archaic culture is still alive, and people still, for the Māori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, the highest thing that you can strive for is your whānau, which is your family, or like the local community around you. And like, you should do everything to serve your family and your local community. And like, everything should be done as like almost an act of self-sacrifice for serving those people. And again, that really resonated with me as well. So I stayed there, learned how to hunt. So I learned how to go like out into the mountains. I got my gun license and would go hunting for chamois and deer in the mountains. And I met a beautiful Brazilian girl as well. And I was working in a...
Oh, that's where you guys met. Okay.
Yeah. So we met in New Zealand and really hit it off and had a really deep connection straight away. And then I was working in a hotel which is called Sherwood. We had basically just started this hotel, and the hotel was it had been a really run down motel. Like, it was in, if you can imagine like a motel in like 1970s style, so green carpets, pink wash basins, like really fancy lights. Like, it was, and what we did is we turned it into this really funky place for local people to come. But then also, if you were traveling to New Zealand and you wanted to really experience something authentic, you could come and you could eat great food prepared by local chefs, have delicious local wines, and do workshops. So we had like all sorts of different workshops, like making jewelry and bicycle workshops, or sourdough bread workshops, and like all of these kind of eclectic things.
Love it.
And again, that kind of that Maori virtue of, it's called manakitanga, which is service and kindness and hospitality, and like enhancing your mana, which is your spirit energy, by helping other people. I think that those ideas, like, they really resonated with me, and they were something which was totally different to what I had experienced growing up here, Southeast London, where, you know, I always would joke that on Sundays here, people don't go to church anymore. People go to like the big shopping centre. So like Sunday is the busiest day that you can go to the big shopping centres, because and people go, they wear their best clothes and they drive their best car and they get it cleaned and they go to the shopping centre. And I was always pretty disgusted with that. I was always just instinctively did not think that was right or good, that was the culture that we had, and that we still have.
Right. People are going to worship
consumerism.
People are going to worship the god of consumerism.
I suppose as well. It's like, you know, going and sort of like strutting your stuff around the shopping centre, and just intuitively really wasn't into that at all. So living in New Zealand, I felt at home. The problem is that, like I said before, the biggest virtue for the Maori is to serve your whānau, right? So I'm really blessed, because I have got a lovely family. I've got a brother and cousins, and get along well with my parents and my grandparents. And so it started to dawn on me that I was being a massive, massive pussy, and also a bit of a hypocrite, because I was just chilling in the South Island of New Zealand, just like, if there's nuclear war and it all kicks off, then I'm great. Like I'm fine.
Right.
But my family still live in the UK, and if things really kick off, then I'm not really serving them by being here. I'm not really helping them in any way by being in New Zealand. And the same is true for my fiance Carla as well. She's from the south of Brazil, and we're, you know, miles away from the south of Brazil. If things happen with her family, it's really difficult to get back for her family. And so with kind of like with that clarity, I then decided that I would move back to the UK. And also it's kind of like tied into hard money as well. But like during my time in New Zealand, especially in where I was, New Zealand's got a really rich culture of gold mining, of mining in general, but also gold mining. And so
I didn't know that, honestly. Okay.
Yeah. So they had a gold rush in many parts of New Zealand, but especially in the South Island. For the Māori, they prized it's called punamu, which is a green stone. It's jade. So they prized that. They didn't prize gold. And when the first Europeans arrived in like the Shotover rivers and the Arrow rivers in the South Island, they were just full of gold. Just the story of one of the folk jumped into part of the river and came out just coated in gold. And so I really sort of like learned about gold through being there. And then also I would go, again, like being an outdoorsman, I would go and pan for gold. We would take a sluice box into the upper course of the river, and we would set it up and spend a whole day laboring in the sun, digging behind a rock, like huge amounts of rock and mud and gravel and earth. And then we would get like a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of pan through at the end of the day and get a tiny amount of gold. And that's a really powerful way to learn about work and how scarce gold is, and how you have to really put in a lot of effort to get a small amount of gold. So at the same, all of this is like going on for me, and I was actually buying gold, New Zealand gold. So I was stacking a little bit of Bitcoin. I had bought Bitcoin, but then was just kind of like hodling Bitcoin. I wasn't like regularly stacking Bitcoin, but I was stacking silver. and
Right.
gold as well, like kilo bars of silver.
This is pre-Lightning days as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. This is
yeah.
like when you were
This is
enacting a
like 20,
transaction, everything was on.
24, yeah, it's 2015, 16, 17. I was in New Zealand for 6 years, and we left in 2017.
Holy cow,
Yeah.
man!
Yeah.
Shout
So
out to
then,
the man. Love the
yes,
Kiwis.
yeah, so do I. I really do, and I've still got some close
Amazing
friends
people.
that I still speak to regularly. Yeah, and I hope that I've got the opportunity to go back and spend more time there, and yeah, I love it. I love it, especially hunting. I mean, it's a paradise for going off into the mountains with a rifle for a few days, and yeah, camping and just glassing the mountains and looking for animals, and yeah, hopefully shooting something and carrying it out.
So right, oh my gosh, yeah. So did you know previously how to like I I'm such an urbanist, I don't even know how to frame it, but like how to slice up an animal,
How to
and
butcher an
divide
animal.
and
Yeah, no, I didn't know any of
turn them
that.
into
No,
food. Yeah.
yeah, I had no idea about any of that. So, but in the UK, if you were to go hunting, it's quite an elitist thing to do. Like, no one has to be
Huh?
able to go hunting in the UK. You need to have land. You need to, you'd go with a shotgun. You might go shooting for pheasant on your friend's land. Like, I grew up very middle class family, and I never was exposed to anything like that. Whereas in New Zealand, it's the everyday man does this to put food on his table, and it's not an elitist thing. And so
Wow.
you can join like the New Zealand deer
Wow.
stalkers, and they'll do like a hunts license, or it's a hunts course, and then I'm trying to remember how long it is. Maybe I want to say maybe like an 8-week course, maybe 10-week course, about the same time as the diploma, right? So it's like that sort of time, and you learn how to look
Yeah.
after, like shoot a gun, how to be safe with a gun, how to butcher an animal, about being safe in the mountains, because a lot of people
Hmm.
go on their own into the mountains, and like it's about how to be safe. And so yeah, so I learned all of that there, and also it's something which environmentalists are really into, because if you don't control the population, then the population gets really out of hand, and it starts to have a
Yeah.
negative impact on the environment as a
Yeah.
whole, because they start to graze all of the trees. None of the trees can grow. It turns everything in, like, it just
Yeah.
destabilizes the ecosystem if you don't keep control of that population.
Yeah.
So and there's no natural predators.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with, the couple of videos that went viral about the reintroduction of wolves into, was it Yosemite or Yellowstone? Something
Yeah,
that starts with a Y,
yeah. Yeah, so that's a really
and
cool
even
of
though I'm
like
from Los Angeles,
it's a really good example of positive and negative feedbacks.
go ahead. I think we have like a little bit of a delay.
We do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so in geography, which is the subject that I teach, you have to understand it's a holistic science, right? Always say that geography is the king of the sciences, because you have to understand it, everything as a whole. Most science is very reductionist, where you're trying to grow down and down and down and see everything for the smaller parts, whereas geography is, it's very holistic. You've got to understand how systems operate and how feedbacks work within a system, how
Yeah.
there are stores and flows within natural systems, positive and negative feedbacks, dynamic equilibrium.
Yeah.
And that's very helpful. The example you gave is very helpful for understanding that, not only in geography, but also in Bitcoin itself, because Bitcoin operates as a system with positive and negative feedbacks in order to maintain equilibrium of the system.
So during your time in New Zealand, the foundation was being laid for sustainability, independence, sovereignty.
Hard money.
I've noticed in the Bitcoin world, even though we're talking about a global communication layer, a global coordination layer, with money, it gives rise to hyper local movements where all of a sudden people, it seems to have this effect on people where they're all of a sudden looking outward and focusing on their communities in a way that we really haven't seen in the last 20, 30 years with the move towards globalization. It's an interesting pendulum swing in the opposite direction.
Yeah, you're right. It's something that I think about a lot because we don't operate in isolation, and we do need a global world in order to thrive. Romanticize the idea of living as this totally sovereign individual, where I'm growing all of my own food and providing all of my own energy, and I've come to realize that unfortunately that's not really feasible in the world that we live in, because we've become so interdependent on each other. We need this global system of trade. I do think that, however, that culture is something which should be localized, and that every culture, one of the problems with globalization is that it's led to this kind of like sludge culture, which is this real like homogeny of values and culture. And that's something that I think Bitcoin has the ability to really help out with, that we can actually start to build cultures which are I want to say proud. I want to say cultures that are built with pride and built with like strong virtues at the core of those cultures, like the Maori culture, right? The Maori culture, the Maori culture of New Zealand. Why is that? Why is it that that culture is able to survive? Well, it's able to survive and has been so successful because they have defended that culture. They are warriors. It's a warrior culture. They hold their values and their virtues as important, and they're able to defend them against attack. And really, I think one of the problems is that many cultures have not been able to defend against the attack of fiat money and the attack of fiat values, because those things are supported by the fiat system, which is an infinite ability to print money and to undermine everything else. Where with Bitcoin, you actually have a defense, right? It's a shield against that. It's a bulwark against being undermined by another culture. And just because that culture, that is actually an inferior culture, but is able to kind of impose itself on you through its ability to create money.
And like I think a lot of people erroneously equate cultural pride with xenophobia, where this is not the case whatsoever.
No.
It's purely positive, pro diversity in all reality. You are proud of, right? I mean, you're proud of the uniqueness of that plot on the globe, the cultural idiosyncrasies that have arisen amongst the people, the gastronomy, you name it. It's a beautiful way to celebrate the uniqueness of that corner of the world, and work towards making it more robust so that it stands the test of time, and it creates almost like this just an appreciation for the individuality of where people come from.
Well,
I told you I was go ahead.
No, go on.
I was just gonna say, like, that was one of my main takeaways from being an international flight attendant for years. Was we would always stay like in a Western chain hotel, and around in the immediate area, you had your Starbucks, your McDonald's, KFC, all these entities that cater to like the Western businessmen that are going to be staying in the hotels or whatever. And there are certain economic factors that they have a way of conquering local culture, local pride, local economies. And being someone I was born 15 minutes away from Hollywood, which has exported this globalized culture to every corner of the world. For me, it was like, man, I can't get away from this US centric, promoted by Hollywood sludge, that has really conquered a lot of beautiful local dynamic cultures. I'm totally tracking with you on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you're right as well about the reaction of people to think that that is a xenophobic thing. But one of the things that I most love about going traveling is going and experiencing another culture. And I don't know why someone who was coming to visit here wouldn't also want to experience the culture of here and what the culture is of this place. But to give you an idea of how
absolutely
kind of deep this goes, I found a Twitter profile last week. It's by an English guy called Helliand, and it's all about the English Saxon culture. And one of my colleagues, I said, "Hey, check this out. It's a really beautifully curated profile." And so I said, "Check this out. Come and have a look at this." And he was like, "Whoa! You can't show that on the school computers." He was like, "That's like." And it's just like the St. George's Cross, and but it's not it's not xenophobia in any stretch of the imagination. In the same way that the Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, the Maori people have intense pride of their culture and who they are, and it doesn't make them xenophobic towards anyone else. It just means that they have a strong sense of their identity and their whānau, right? Their family, their history, for the Maori as well, the greeting is kia ora, and kia ora has so many meanings, right? But essentially, it's the recognition when you're greeting someone of not only that person, but also all of their ancestors through time. So it's a very meaningful greeting of someone, to be like, you're recognizing this person at the tip of the generational spear that has led to that person, and you're recognizing all of those generations of their whānau all the way back through time. And people have lost a real sense of that, especially here in, I think of London and where I am a little bit like Mordor. It's like got the all-seeing eye, and it's just people just sort of behaving like orcs, and just like everyone's so kind of like watched that I feel unable to like really express who they really are, and really self-actualize.
And the growth of London, this brain drain that the UK has been, seeing. I mean, the brain drain has also been coming from other countries in Europe. This can be argued as a Fiat effect. Small towns, people that come from areas where the economic activity can't necessarily support the younger generations because of the purchasing power of the money being eroded faster than ever. It's a Fiat phenomenon if you look at it through that lens, and having a money that preserves the purchasing power of its users makes small scale business far more profitable and sustainable. It lends itself to making more robust, making rural life or life outside of these mega cities, these cities that are bigger than anything else humanity has ever seen. It makes the reaction to move to more rural settings a lot more feasible now, all of a sudden, especially when you also consider the modularity of the energy situation and how Bitcoin mining all of a sudden makes that a lot more feasible. Again, these are different things that, like, coin in its own way, I think these are like third order effects that nobody saw even 10 years ago, makes local communities a lot more robust all of a sudden. It's a fascinating knock-on effect,
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that experimenting with that is what I find really interesting. So the question becomes, when you start to think about these things, well, how do you bring this, how do you start to bring this into reality? Because like you said, you start to really start to build conviction in your understanding of Bitcoin. So for me, I suppose that for me happened when I was trying to move quite a lot of silver and gold, physical gold and silver, from New Zealand to the UK via South America. And I think that it really kind of
Okay.
dawned on me when I was at the border of, I was in Santiago with a backpack full of gold and silver, going enough. There were the two of us, and I was under the limit of what you're legally allowed to have. And putting that bag through the scanner, and the scanner going beep 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 beep, and Bitcoin wins
Yeah.
hands down on that respect. So I think for
Yeah.
me, that was a big kind of like turning point where I was like, yeah, I need to sell all of this and buy Bitcoin instead.
Yeah.
And then also
I need to trade in the analog for the digital version of this.
yeah, but there's also the Lindy effect, isn't there, as well? Like the longer it's around, you start to be like, and also there's becomes to be more people that are talking about it and everything like that. So coming back to the UK, I was like, how do I start to bring this into physical reality? Because it's at the moment still just a concept, an idea. How can I start to bring this into like some form of existence? And that's quite a tricky thing to do,
Yeah.
because you have to persuade other people to participate
Yeah.
with you. And
Yeah.
most people here really do not have a need for Bitcoin. There is not really that much of a need for Bitcoin, and people don't grok Bitcoin
No.
very easily as a consequence of that. People see
No.
it as an investment. They see it as a very, very speculative investment, like a very risky investment. And
Yep.
they also typically view it with disdain, largely because they have read a lot of our news media and they still largely trust our news media. And so it's
Yep.
a difficult proposition for, like, how do you start to build a community, or how do you germinate that seed and get something to start going? It's quite a tricky
Yeah.
proposition.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the same in the US as well. We're at the top of the current Cantillon effect. We're
Yeah,
closest to the spigot. However, I will say, in the US, the US currently reminds me of Argentina about 10 to 15 years ago, where people are starting to complain about food prices and, where's this pain point coming from, because we were always going to be the last people to suffer inflation. And, we're the frogs that are in the pots of water that are boiling the slowest.
yeah,
So the realization, of course, you do have financially sophisticated people everywhere in the UK and the US, who will wake up to certain things fairly quickly. But as far as like the end of the fiat world, people in both our countries will be the most comfortable and the last to, let the dominoes fall, to opt out of the current system that affords them all this comfort.
yeah. Which there is a poetic justice in that. Having said that, this is, like we said before, this is my little corner of the world, with the people that I love
Yeah.
and the people that I've grown up with and the people that are my family. And so, given what we spoke about earlier, there's a sort of sense of responsibility to do what I can to kind of affect change and help them along the way, and kind of get things moving as quickly as I can. The biggest problem is that,
Yeah.
like, Bitcoin is just such a non-violent thing. It's just so it's so non-violent that you cannot force Bitcoin on someone by persuading someone of Bitcoin's merits.
Nope.
They have to come to it. They have to reach their own realization, and you can help them. But you really, if at any point you go into it with the intention of trying to force that person, then you will do more damage than good. And that's a really fascinating part of Bitcoin, really, that you cannot force it in any way. In fact,
No.
typically a better strategy is just to not seem as though you're encouraging someone to get involved in any way. It's so for me the kind of strategy was like to become a teacher. My father had always said to me, like, you would be a good teacher, you should be a teacher. So when I came back to the UK, I was like, right, well, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to get this to work? I remember once Max Kaiser saying something as well, that like Bitcoin affords anyone to be an artist. Like anyone can just be an artist, and you can make money being an artist because you're saving in the hardest money. And so it doesn't matter what you do. You don't need to go out and earn loads and loads of money. You just need to earn more than you spend. And so I can be fairly frugal. I don't need to drive like around in a Ferrari or anything like that. I can, live below my means. So a lot of people don't want to be teachers in the UK because you don't make a lot of money. So you end up really struggling to get on the property ladder and all of these things. But I was like, well, I understand Bitcoin, and I understand that, I can save in Bitcoin. So I can pretty much do whatever I want to do, really. I don't, I'm have like an enormous crazy stack. I'm not like, oh, fuck, I'm just going to retire and do whatever I like. Still have to earn some money, and I still have to pay my fiat bills and stuff. But
absolutely,
understanding Bitcoin gives you that kind of thing, like, well, what do I want to do? What do I want to do, and what do I think is going to add value, and like is going to be like something that I can put myself into. And again, that like process of like self-actualization, like what's going to be the best of myself that I can do and that I can give. Trains to become a teacher.
I love that.
Go on.
Yeah, I love that concept of Bitcoin enabling a renaissance of sorts, and we're seeing it play out with you. Like, had you maybe continued to think in fiat terms, you might have looked at an alternative to becoming a teacher, and the education system would be worse off without having you around. But as long as you're stacking sats, education, art, culture in general becomes far more feasible. These are pursuits where your time preference has to be changed from the current fiat, fever dream that a lot of people are living in. And we could very well be on the cusp of this this shift in time preference in a global sense, hopefully.
Yeah.
So you decide to become a teacher when you come back to the UK. Sorry, we have a little bit of a delay here. Don't mean to be cutting you off.
No, go ahead.
So you're like, okay, yeah, I should become a teacher. I should become a teacher in the classical sense. What did those first steps look like? Where you're like, okay, I'm gonna introduce teaching this revolutionary protocol in a traditional setting. How did you get the ball rolling? What did that look like?
Okay. Firstly, so I trained to become a teacher, and as I was training to become a teacher, I wasn't mentioning really anything about Bitcoin to my colleagues. Okay. I find it difficult to not mention anything, but I was doing my best to kind of keep it to myself because it's, I think, a professional risk to tell people that you're into Bitcoin, and so I kept it pretty much to myself that I was interested in Bitcoin. Whilst I was training to become a teacher, the people that I was most interested in are people who championed the students being autonomous and learning through their own experimentation rather than a didactic style of teaching where the teacher is pouring knowledge from their head into the student's head, which is the traditional form of teaching. During my teacher training, I was able to play around with those ideas and write about those ideas, and it was kind of accepted and like, yeah, cute, like experiment with those ideas. When I then got my first job secondary school, I started then really going for enacting some of those things. So I would like clear all the tables in the room to the outside of the room and have everyone sitting in a circle, and I would like pose a philosophical question to the class, and then go around and like ask, get everyone's opinion on the question, or I would get them to do like crazy projects and things, and it really put the cat amongst the pigeons with the other members of staff. And that school, they ended up letting me go for being a bit too much of a maverick, and I kind of realized that I needed to sort of keep my kind of take it a bit more slowly and be a bit more patient, and don't go in like a bull in a china shop trying to change things when it's going to make people uncomfortable. It's that kind of idea of non-violence again.
Interesting. Yeah.
So the second school that I ended up getting a job in is the same school that I studied at. So this is the school where I'm talking to you from now. The school.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, is the school that I went to as a student. And I was also head boy of the school. I was like, when you become part of the school, you can take on this responsibility of being like head boy, because it's an all boys school, which is quite common in the UK. And I ended up having the interview at the school with my old geography teacher. So I teach geography, and it was with my old geography teacher, the teacher who taught me up until I was 18. And then who was the deputy, he is now the deputy head teacher, but he was the head of year 11, which was when I was 16. So he was like head of my year in that year. So it was a really good interview, and they we aligned on many like in many ways, and they kind of knew who I was and had an idea of like who I am and knew about me. So with that in mind, I was like, I'm going to take it much more easy. I'm not going to go in and start just like changing everything up. I'm going to teach in the way that they expect me to teach. Yep. So it's going to be a bit more of a traditional style, didactic style, and don't rock the apple cart. Just play by the rules. In fact, my head of department, who was my teacher, he was saying to me, stick to the rules, stay by the rules. And so I'd be like, okay, I'm going to stick with the rules. I'm going to just like, whatever the lessons are that they want me to teach, I'm just going to teach them as they are. But as a consequence of that, I was in need of a way of finding like that artistic expression, I suppose, and like finding a way to like express the way that I wanted to teach and the way that I felt was right to teach, but you're just contained within the system as it stands, because people self-regulate and people regulate each other, and people don't want people to be doing things unusual. They say they do want people to do things that are unusual, but the Overton window is very narrow with what's like accepted and what you can really do. So I went to see, so we're like, there's a few schools all together. There's this one, there's a girls' school, there's another school and a primary school, and they're all together in what's called a multi-academy trust. So they're all like have one CEO, and I made an appointment to go and speak to the CEO of the schools fairly early on when I had started here, maybe about 9 months to a year into my career here. And it was just as all of the stuff with FTX was kicking off. And I went to speak to him, said to him, and I remember it had been giving me ulcers. Whenever I get really stressed out, I get a mouthful of big ulcers. And I had huge ulcers as I was like, really felt compelled to want to teach about Bitcoin in the school, but then also that professional risk of coming out as a Bitcoiner with people who have this really negative opinion of Bitcoin, of it being for scammers, and of it being people think of the worst, especially at that moment. People were thinking the very, very worst of Bitcoin. But I'd seen what was happening in El Salvador. I'd seen what John was doing with Mi Primer Bitcoin. All of the workbook was open source, and that was for me like it just felt as though that was the way to. Again, we're talking about this like not forcing things, of like letting things emerge as they emerge, and kind of allowing it to happen serendipitously as well, and not pushing, but just allowing it. Went to speak to him, and you know, he had his reservations, but I think he could see just how passionate I was about it. Spoke to the head teacher here about it. I asked him, I didn't really ask him. I said, would you object to me teaching about Bitcoin? Which is, it's much more likely that someone's going to say, no, I don't object to you doing that. I'm not going to stand in your way. I'm not going to stop you from doing it. And so he was like, okay, yeah, you can do that. And we had just launched this after school project as well, where teachers were supposed to be delivering after school clubs. And so did it as an after school club. At the time, everything was going on in El Salvador, but there was I didn't have any real contact with any other Bitcoiners. Not really, not like you and I are talking now.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to any meetups in London. It was still fairly kind of lonely kind of pursuit, but took the initiative, started it, and I really wanted it to emulate what I thought that teaching should be. So that's learning through discovery, not telling someone something, not saying this is the way it is, but instead posing questions to that person to just enhance their own understanding. So lots of Socratic questioning, lots of activities. So rather than like, if you're doing work that you can do on your own, then you should do that in your own time. If it's reading or writing, ideally you should be doing that in your own time when you're alone. If you're in a classroom with a group of people that are the same age as you, you should be doing something collaborative, where you're working together, where you're building relationships, where you're like just going through, like just you're learning by discovery. And so I was able to put all of that into my teaching about Bitcoin. And I just really focused on how can I make each of the lessons like active, where you can, So then,
I imagine. Sorry, cutting you off because there's the delay. But so I imagine then with this prospect of the after school clubs, if you will, these after school activities, that also had a way of separating, let's call it the wheat from the chaff. Like the students that chose to attend this club, there was already this voluntary element to it where they're like, cool, like whatever, I saw some TikToks about crypto or whatever, and all of a sudden like my teacher is saying he's going to teach us the basics of Bitcoin. So you have a really captive audience for those guys that are showing up after school.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was important as well for it to be a voluntary thing. So yeah, and we had students that turned up and that wanted to learn about Bitcoin. And at first I was not that, I suppose not as competent as I could have been. You know, I really threw myself in at the deep end and was like, I'm going to teach this. And you know, to truly understand a subject, you have to really be able to teach it to someone else. So it's a challenge to be able to, because they ask you questions, right? So even though you're trying to pose questions to them, if they ask you a question, you've got to be able to try your best to make an explanation for it. So 100%. It was quite daunting to do that as well. But I had a pretty good feeling that I thought it was quite likely that we were the first school in the UK to be teaching about Bitcoin. It seemed like at that moment there was such bad negative feeling about it. So I had a really incredible sense of pride about that, because even though no one knew it or cared, for me, I was like, I reckon we are the first school in the UK to be teaching about Bitcoin after school. And like, and for it to be the school that I went to as well. And we talked about like having community and like a sense of like culture. Like, this is my culture. This is the school that I went to. It's like something which is important to me. And then I'm teaching about Bitcoin in this school, the first school in the UK to be teaching about it. It was like a huge thing for me, like really, really massive and important thing. And had great sense of accomplishment, and also something like really manifesting itself as it was meant to be, I suppose. So yeah,
So
and then
cool.
and so
You went and you trained to be a Maori warrior, and you brought those lessons back to your island there. Fun little fact, I also used to teach at my alma mater back in the day. I was a grade English teacher, and and I was I went back to teach so early on. I was like 23, 24. I was a kid teaching kids. And I had like former teachers who were coworkers now all of a sudden, and that was a total mind fuck, if you will. And like some of the teachers that I didn't particularly like, in my teenage years, all of a sudden were like my favorite coworkers. It was such a turn of events. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
So you come back to your corner of the world, and you're making history. Like, we're gonna look back and like, this is monetary history being made, educational history.
Yeah, it's kind of strange to think about that though, because
so cool.
You're right. Understanding Bitcoin, you think, wow, this is just so important for the country as a whole. Like, this is we're starting something here. Like, ideally we want to get this into every school in the country. It seems like a massive challenge, but ideally that's where we want to be. We want to have this delivered as part of the curriculum, just like it is in El Salvador, where every student in the country is just, people are, and to think that we started it at this school would be making history. It is making history in that way.
Yeah.
The students don't know that or appreciate that, and the staff at the school don't know that or appreciate that. So it's kind of strange in that way, because I think that, and I have a strong conviction that that's the case, but no one else really does. And a lot of people think it's a bit of a curiosity, and a lot of people think that it's, Huxley is teaching about Bitcoin, and it's still, in some ways they kind of scoff at it a little bit or laugh about it or tease. So, but I think that's still to be expected. And yeah, so it's strange in that respect, but I've got so many plans for what I want to do, and I think the difficult thing now is balancing the responsibility of being the first in the UK and trying to help others to set up their own after school clubs or their own thing in their own community hall. I'm still balancing that with the responsibility that I have to the community here, because I'm head of year 10, so I'm directly responsible for nearly 200 15 to 16-year-old boys, which is a significant responsibility. I'm also a teacher of geography, and I hold that responsibility as being, that's a responsibility to the students and to the staff and to the school and to their parents, but then also teaching about Bitcoin in its own way, the responsibility to do it in the right way, to do it in a way that is useful and is interesting for the students,
actionable,
and is actionable, and but also is replicable, right? I want to make it so that anyone who knows about Bitcoin could just take this, and they could just go and they could replicate it and like put their own spin on it. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're having at the moment. Is a lot of people, they like the idea of teaching about Bitcoin. We've got a big community of Bitcoiners in the UK, which I'm now part of. But people don't necessarily think of themselves as teachers. People think I'm I'm not trained as a teacher, so I can't be a teacher myself. Whereas I don't think that that's the right way to think about it. I think you should think of it more as, like you said, someone who organizes sitting down to drink mate and just provide. Like, I think of it more as hospitality.
Yeah.
I think people should think of it more as hospitality than teaching. Like putting people at ease, making people feel comfortable, with each other, providing
Yeah.
this space for people to learn, and the conditions, like a gardener, right? A gardener is, the old way of thinking about gardening was that you put like fertilizers in the soil and you make the plants grow. But that's not really the right way to garden. The right way to garden is to care for the soil and to provide the right conditions for the plant to just fully express itself. And that's the way we should be thinking
100%.
about teaching about Bitcoin as well. People think of it, again, they still have that old model where it's like, I have the knowledge in my head and I'm going to pour it out of my head and into your head. And that's not the way that people learn. People learn through a process of self-realization and discovery for themselves. And you just need to provide the space for them to do that. And also, a lot of people come into classrooms feeling really highly.
I love that humility. Yeah. For me, like, I look back to my education classes back during my bachelor's, and I love the approach of the guide on the side as opposed to the sage on the stage, But all of a sudden, when I kick things off down here, I noticed that a lot of the meetups, people were looking at me and focused on me and asking me questions and throwing out the classic FUD talking points, and it's up to me to debunk them and dispel them. And then you throw in, I'm not a native Spanish speaker and I'm learning how to talk about Bitcoin in Spanish at the same time, and I've tried to continue telling them, hey, I just want to be the spark, like I'm just trying to point you in the right direction, and I have resources galore. I can point you to wherever you need to go, as opposed to like this, look at me, I am the Bitcoin master or whatever, which is just so uncomfortable. And it's really interesting to dispel this guru dynamic that so many people think needs to exist in the Bitcoin world, whereas we're Bitcoin gardeners.
There you go. That's exactly right, man. Well, that's the best way to think about it. And like, I think that there's a lot of synergy between gardening and Bitcoin. I love gardening, and I think there's a lot of synergy behind it. With gardening, it's all about your context, right? What's the direction that the garden faces? Which direction does the prevailing wind come from? Like, what are the best plants that are going to grow best in that garden? The touch of the farmer is, but also there's a saying like the best fertilizer is the farmer's shadow, which is just like this kind of idea that having someone care is actually the best fertilizer. Someone just sort of like watching and checking in on you and just making sure that you're okay. That is the best fertilizer, and also the best thing that you can do as a teacher, right? Just providing that space where it's like, this is a place where you can feel comfortable, where you can be yourself, where like if you've got a problem, you can come and speak to me, and if you've got a question, I can try my best to answer it. But also that idea of context is important too. Like, you have to teach within your context, and if you become like this guru where it's like, right, I am the person that tells everyone how to teach Bitcoin in their schools, and everyone has to like look at me to be like, I was the first person to do it, and so therefore I should go like on tours around the country and be like a consultant, and like people look to me and like, how do you do it? It doesn't take into account all of the idiosyncrasies of each different school and each different person, each different teacher,
100%,
and all of the different people that are there. I don't want that. I don't want that at all. I just want to focus on like providing value to my little community, like my students in
Mm-hmm.
my school, you know, I want to keep
Yep.
everything below Dunbar's number, or like around about Dunbar's number, you know, just like that number of people who I
Yep.
know all of their names, I recognize their faces, and
Yeah.
you know, keep it to my whānau. Like, make sure that my whānau is like well looked after, make sure that I serve my whānau effectively, and then anything else beyond
Yeah.
that is I can like
Yeah.
try to contribute where I can.
Yeah. I truly think like one of the master strokes with the Mi Primer Bitcoin initiative was recognizing that and keeping
Yeah.
things open source. You know, there's certain things that you have to agree to, Bitcoin only, yada, yada, yada. But having that freedom and recognizing this this divide and conquer type approach that the open source mentality can have, where like, you know, for example, here in Argentina, we want to localize the curriculum and provide historic examples of currency collapse and failure, and people have like these very poignant memories of 2001, and we can, you know, a lot of people have the memories of the pain and all of a sudden their savings going up in smoke, but still not able to articulate exactly why that happened and what the solution is, you know. But all that to say, you know, every single community has its own angle to really drive certain points home, certain monetary concepts home that can only resonate in those local terms. And you know, the guys in El Salvador are in the same thing. They probably want to maintain quality and maintain their Dunbar's number of their community, but also recognizing that we have this this like mandate as Bitcoiners. This interesting paradox between being hyper focused locally, but also recognizing that we're dealing with a global technology that is just as pertinent for someone on South Island in New Zealand as someone, you know, if you're in Cordoba. It's an interesting paradox, but as long as we maintain this guide on the side mentality, this gardener mentality, and allow people to, you know, recognize that that really is kind of their role, instead of like, hey, in order for you to become a Bitcoin educator, you need to be the sage on the stage that knows every single thing. You need to be Andreas Antonopoulos, you know. If you can lower that mentality where like, no, like it's more about providing the right tools, the right resources, creating the right atmosphere where you're going to spark, you know, these concepts that came across years ago. That is a way of I don't know, convincing people that they can easily become a Bitcoin educator as well, you know, like lowering that performance anxiety, if you will, you know.
Absolutely. So I think that that's my kind of my biggest challenge at the moment is doing exactly that. And we've had a few people that I've been like onboarding and helping them to become teachers in their own context. And so I am working on that. And really the idea for that is so that we kind of try and remove the barriers to entry. What do you need in order to get started? Because if you want to buy like all of the like equipment, so I've got some equipment here, but like if you want to buy seed signers and you want to buy like little miners, or you want to buy like the dice to show like how probability works and how like nodes, so that they can store the nodes, like all of these things, they cost money, and they might be something which stops someone. Like, it's quite a significant investment to like get all of those things so that you can start doing teaching. And like I've got the bands of fiat money and things like that. So the idea is to be able to raise money that so that we can provide that into people in a box, so that people would receive a box. And so they do like a certain step of processes, and they take a small assessment, and they show the right information, and then they just get the box. and then they can go from there, right? And then we provide them with the books as well, and the workbooks, or the workbook, like their first set of workbooks printed, and it's like, right, off you go. And so it's not so much like, oh, you've got to be, this is how you've got to do it, but these are the tools, so you don't have to pay for it out of pocket. It's going to like get you going. And we've raised the money from people who maybe want to see people teaching in schools. Like there's loads of people in the Bitcoin community in the UK who are like, I can't believe that you're doing this. This is so good. They don't have time, or they don't have the inclination to go and teach in a school, but they would love to support it. So they want to donate some Bitcoin to help that happen. But again, like, so that's something that
Speaking of which, we'll make sure to include links below if you feel so inclined to donate to Bitcoin education in the UK. By all means, we covet your sats. Resources are needed to move the ball forward.
Totally. Or if you want to volunteer to be a teacher as well, and you don't have to be a teacher in the school, right? You could start something with a scout club, or in a community hall, or in a local church, or a library. A local pub would be a good place. Like you can do go to a pub early on the weekend in the morning when they usually don't have people there. You know, there's loads of places where you can do it. And I think that having that like low expectation of like maybe one or two people will turn up, and that being fine, like that is good. Like that is progress. Like you do two people, and they do two people, and they teach. You know, or if you're teaching 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. These are all exponents, and that's the way that Bitcoin works. Just like, you know, stay
100%.
humble. Like you don't have to be like this amazing Antonopoulos like figure, and like you just have to just provide like the facility for people to understand. And I found that learning through doing for the students is it helps them to grasp what's going on, because the biggest objection that people have to Bitcoin is it doesn't exist, it's not even real. But when people are actually building a node, when people are rolling dice and understanding how the probability works behind mining, or they're stamping their seed phrase, or they're generating their seed phrase with coins or dice, or it becomes physical and real for them. And their understanding just goes like really fast. They really grasp it really quickly, especially young people, but as well. So I think
you're in the process of creating future Bitcoin beasts in your class.
So the question that I have,
learning about the protocol.
Go on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the question that I have is like, my question is like, what happens if all of the staff in a school understand Bitcoin? Like if we go, like, let's say now we go through a bull market, and like they've all been like seeing that I'm teaching about Bitcoin, and so it's in their consciousness, and they're aware that this is going on, and they've seen that I've printed all of the books, and that I've been distributing the books to the children, and they've seen that we had a display on the school board during a staff meeting, like what are the most searched terms in our school, and Bitcoin was on the word cloud, one of the biggest searched terms. So these are all like subliminal things that are going on. What happens when they understand Bitcoin and they themselves go down the rabbit hole, and there comes someone like the first cohort of staff in a school in a country to understand Bitcoin? Then I think what happens, like what I'd like to think happens, is then that's the type of thing that then changes the way that they then teach, because understanding Bitcoin is understanding how education's been poisoned by fiat and by government and by control of a centralizing force. So what happens when they all start to understand Bitcoin, and how does that then change? And then how does that then mean that you can teach how you want, and you don't have everyone self-policing everyone else about how everyone's teaching, and people can, it becomes really dramatically different, I think.
Right. Yeah. That really reminds me of Brandon Quittam's article on Bitcoin being mycelium. It really just works its way into every nook and cranny, and also thrives in situations where there's decay. And so I feel like we've reached a point where, you can call it the state, you can call it central planning, but we've arrived at this point where these entities are bigger than they've ever been, and they're just inherently inefficient and incompetent. And you have this protocol, this new science, because I truly think Bitcoin is a new science, an emerging science, that can be viewed as this mycelium that creates nutrients in life and rises decay. It's a really interesting prospect.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And there's all of these ideas which are going around at the moment within Bitcoin about circular communities and circular economies, and there's still so much which is uncharted territory. You know, like I've been thinking within a context of a school, how does a school work as a circular community, and how can you integrate Bitcoin? Because there's so much intellectual capital within a school. There's so much you know, and that doesn't get monetized or appreciated even. Quite often it gets discarded. A lot of students do huge amounts of work in paper books, which then get thrown away.
Yep.
And that's a huge amount of waste. Like how much do these students have that doesn't get really seen by anyone? It gets maybe seen by their teacher occasionally. They don't get any real reward for it. I think that there's potential there for Bitcoin, especially as if you were to do like micropayments or fast payments, or them to be able to, I mean, imagine what a school economy could look like if it was actually running on a Bitcoin standard, and how the positive feedbacks could work so that you've got this like exponential spiraling effect as you've got all these positive feedbacks going on. But again, you can't really like implement something like that. That has to be something which is emergent, which you hopefully participate in, but you can't force that type of thing. But I'm working in that
Every
direction.
School can.
Go on.
Like, what are some of the initiatives or like indicative of working in that direction?
So the thing that I've discovered recently, which I think is really exciting, and that there's two things that I'm really excited about. But the first one is all of the big businesses in the UK, financial services, insurance, banks, all of those that work in cities across the UK, they all use thin clients like this machine, like HP machine. And they're all like a liability for that business, because once this has come to the end of its life, or they've finished paying the lease on it, it becomes a liability. They have to get rid of it in an environmentally friendly way. So
interesting.
There's the Turing Trust is run by Alan Turing's family, and Alan Turing is obviously foundational in cryptography, or a really seminal figure within cryptography. And what they do is they take these little computers, or they take these computers, and then they pay for them to be shipped to Malawi in Kenya. But the charity doesn't make any. Yeah, this is really expensive for the charity, but the shipping is expensive. But the fees at the border is also really, really expensive. So they spend all of their money on a couple of things: storing all of this e-waste. They have like warehouses full of this stuff because they want to take it, but then they struggle to raise the capital to then be able to ship it to Malawi or Kenya. But the thing is, these make perfect nodes. They're like the perfect thing for a node. Like you can take one of these, you can
100%.
You know, you can unscrew it. You can put in a SSD, an NVMe SSD, really easily. You can put a Start9 on it, or a Linux OS, or whatever you want to do with it. So
shout out to the boys at Start9.
Massive shout out to the boys at Start9. I love Start9. So you can take these, and they basically, you can buy them from the Turing Trust, which then gives the Turing Trust a revenue stream. You could then employ the students who have graduated from the Bitcoin diploma to be upgrading the nodes. So they could be then taking them, upgrading the SSD, flashing Start9 on it. and then you could be selling them to the Bitcoin community for a really reasonable price.
Yep.
Obviously, you should be sending some of that money to Start9 to make sure that Start9 continues.
Yep.
But then that could be like a little
Absolutely.
seed of like a revenue stream, which then could be going to the students themselves as a potential kind of way to kind of at least kind of break that idea that maybe the students could be earning some money
Yep.
while they're here at school. And it wouldn't be in pounds value, it wouldn't be a lot, but in sats, like they'd be getting a lot of sats, especially if considering how young they are. Like if you think about the amount of sats they could earn doing this, and think about how much that will be worth when they're like 50, 60 years old. So
seriously,
you're
keeping the e-waste out of the landfills.
Yeah.
Those things are still being used, leveraged. Yeah. They're adding decentralization to the network and making the network work more robust.
Yeah.
Your pitch to the Turing family, Huxley, is we have an opportunity to contribute to the most cryptographically secure computation network in the history of humanity, and it's only fitting that you guys form a part of moving the ball forward. Man.
Yeah. So it's really exciting. I'm just like so, but again, I have to really like control myself about like getting carried away and like again like trying to force. Because I want to be like, yeah, let's just like get them in and like get the boys working on them and set up a shop and sell. But it's really like you have to like be like, right, okay, like this is a good idea. If it's going to happen, it will happen on its own like terms. So the thing that I'm working on is this. We have this off timetable week at the end of term, at the end of the summer term before they break up to go for holiday, and it's supposed to be a project to do with STEM, so it's science, technology, engineering, and maths, but it has to be an art-based project. So it has to be a project which the students do something artistic with. So it's called STEAM Week. So my proposal, which has been accepted, is that we will do it's called a tribute to Turing. So the students, it won't be anything to do with Bitcoin. There's nothing to do with Bitcoin at all. Well, obviously it's cryptography, but there's no like direct mention of Bitcoin within it. And it's a 4-day thing where they like you get one group of students coming in, and then another group, and then another group, and then another group. And each day they will be like working on the part of the history of cryptography, and then they're going to be building this like collage of a portrait of Alan Turing with the school badge behind Alan Turing. And I want to then share that with the Turing Trust that we've done this like tribute to Alan Turing, and then propose to them that we could then do this thing. So try and like build that like working relationship with them first, so that we can like secure getting the nodes or getting the computers and then build them into nodes. And I'm really excited. I think it has a lot of potential, and potentially has potential for other nodes as well, because it could be like a potential little revenue stream. I think it wouldn't be anything massive, but again, this is the thing with Bitcoin, right? You don't need to be making huge amounts of money, because you're saving in the best and hardest money that humanity's ever discovered. You know, I was watching this like random thing that came up on my YouTube feed the other day, where this guy was bidding for a table of Nike trainers, right? And the whole table of trainers, they were like some special trainers or something, and it was like $100,000 for like this table of trainers. And I was like, what the fuck? How do we live in a world where like one Bitcoin is worth less than a table of trainers still? And you know, it's like earning even small amounts of money in Bitcoin. It's like totally like it's great. Like even if you're buying them, even if you're buying them in fiat and then selling them at cost. Like you weren't making any profit, but you're buying it in fiat and then selling them for Bitcoin. Like that would be worth it.
Man, amazing. Yeah. It has a way of eliminating this shitcoin speculative approach to all things economically incentivized. You know, like it focuses energy off of speculation towards truly producing and providing value one way or another. And Hux, that initiative with the repurposing of the hard drives is fascinating. That's something that throughout the developed world could easily scale.
Yeah,
You're
well, then,
eliminating, I mean, it's a win-win-win situation.
yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing that would
And
stop you from then maybe just exporting the node through the Turing Trust to somewhere like Felix in Kenya. So then he could also be getting them, and then he could also then be selling them in. So he's teaching people about Bitcoin, and then has a way to sell people their own node as well. So yeah, I think that that's something that has a lot of potential, and also is something which you can immediately see is providing value. Like someone who's not acquainted with Bitcoin can still look at that exchange and say, you're taking something that was wasted, you're providing computers to people in Africa, you're providing a source of income and providing like work for the boys so they understand the value of money. You're decentralizing the network. Like it's just like all stacking on top. Like no one you can't look at that and say, oh, there's a negative side to that. So again, that's a really helpful thing for people to be able to look at and say, that's not.
I'm gonna put this out here on the public record. Okay. This is going way off topic here a little bit, but when I was flying with Emirates, I started this group devoted to swapping layover tips amongst all the cabin crew. There's over 20,000 cabin crew that work for Emirates. And this network of people are flying from London back to Dubai into Kenya, all corners of Africa, and they can easily mule hard drives for free, around the world. It would be an interesting little network to tap into. Now, this community that I started like over a decade ago has almost 28,000 cabin crew members in it, who are constantly looking for ways to leverage their positions all over the world to enact good at different outstations. There's people that are muling clothes to third world destinations in the Emirates network. People that are looking to make use of this resource where they're flying all over the world for free on just doing their job. That could be an interesting way to keep those prices as low as possible and just keep that initiative as efficient as possible. Perhaps it could be something to look into. Yeah. There's definitely going to be another episode after this. Is what we're getting at here. But hey, well, so we're here at a. Go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to wrap things up, but if you want to keep riffing, let's do it.
No, I was going to say we should save. There's another project which so this one is something that I'm working on now, but there's something else which I'm doing next year, which it was supposed to happen this year but has been delayed. And it's a project that involves Rolls-Royce small modular nuclear reactors. And next time we talk, we can go through that, and like that's a tie-in with the school as well. And and that's
Rolls-Royce modular nuclear reactors.
Yeah,
that's a string of words I never thought I would hear strung together.
We'll talk about that in the next one, because that was all planned and pretty much ready to go. But Rolls-Royce, basically they run this schools prize, and it's a biannual thing, and it was supposed to be happening this year, but they delayed it, so it's happening next year. So it's okay. To be honest, it's a good thing, because it means that we've got like more time to, again, we're going back to this idea of like not forcing things, but like it's good to like allow things to kind of like marinate in their juices and let people kind of acclimatize to the idea of Bitcoin being taught in school. And but that will be a good thing to catch up with next time and talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're a Bitcoin gardener that continues to do his thing. Your shadow is there in your community. That ain't going nowhere. Yeah, I love it. Love it. Yeah.
Really, really,
We'll see
thank you
what
so
we'll see
much.
what's growing a year from now.
Well,
Yeah, Huxley, it was an absolute pleasure, and I think easily we've recognized that this won't be the last episode we'll rip on. And we'll have all of Huxley's info down in the description of this video, where you can reach out to him and follow the progress there in London and in the UK in general. And I would love, Huxley, if we could check in a couple months and keep it going.
Yeah, man, definitely. Thank you very much for inviting me onto this and to chat with you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, bro.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. I can't believe we're just being able to get this content out and just talk about something that both of us are so passionate about, and really look forward to following your progress and checking in. This will be us signing off, and we'll see you in the next one.
Kia ora. See you guys. Thank you.